Today's session will be led by one of our solutions engineers, Miles Damesa. Miles will walk us through how forms can capture clean, structured data at the beginning of a process and how workflow can actually use that data to automatically route tasks. It can trigger approvals, update systems, generate documents, and remove a lot of the manual steps a lot of different teams deal with today. He'll also show some practical examples, some design tips, and just general best practices for building those processes to make sure that they're scalable and super easy to maintain. As we move through the presentation, please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A panel. At any time. I will be monitoring the chat throughout the session, and as questions come up, we might wait to the end, or if they're relevant to what Miles is currently going over, I might interrupt and ask that question. If we don't get to your question, or if you'd like any more detailed help afterwards, just let us know. You can either contact our support team as always, or reach out to me or Miles directly, and we'd be happy to assist you there. Just a quick reminder that today's session is being recorded and it will be uploaded to the DocuNav YouTube channel. And so you'll be able to revisit this content or share it with any of your colleagues who weren't able to attend. And so thanks again for joining us today. I hope that this session really does give some helpful ideas. And with that, I'll turn it over to our presenter, Miles.
Thanks, Bobo. I appreciate it. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, get this out of the way. Bobo, is it looking all right? Can you see everything?
Yep, I've got it.
Perfect, thank you. All right, how's it going, everybody? My name is Miles Damesa, and I'm a solutions engineer over here at DocuNav Solutions. And this is going to be a webinar on forms and workflow, a match made in heaven. All right, again, I'm Miles. I've been a solutions engineer here at DocuNav for almost 2 years. I see some familiar faces, people I've worked with, so it's good to see you guys again. And on today's webinar, kind of a quick agenda. We're going to kind of do 3 main parts to this presentation. We're going to have an overview of what Laserfiche forms and workflow is. Configuration, which is going to be how to configure forms and workflow to actually work together. I'll show you guys both how to configure on the form side and then the workflow side, and how to confirm that they are talking to each other. And then I'm going to go into a demo, kind of showing you guys live what it can do, and some simple explanations on how forms and workflow can work together. So kind of some assumptions. I'm assuming most of you guys, just from the names that I recognize, are knowledgeable in forms and workflow itself. Maybe not workflow as much, but at least on the front ends of form side, you guys have filled out forms, know how that looks like. And of course, forms and workflow have to be installed for this to work. So that's kind of a basic assumption that we kind of got to get through. So kind of starting on the Laserfiche Forms side, what is Laserfiche Forms? So Forms is a main core component of the Laserfiche suite. And it basically enables us to take all y'all's paper processes and turn it into a digital process. It is a organizational tool that, I mean, you can see from this example right here. This is from a past presentation from a colleague, but you can see this paper form we have up here, and we turned it into a Laserfiche Forms process that's a little bit easier to digest, and it streamlines data collection, approvals, that kind of thing. Just makes everything a little bit easier on y'all's end, for the most part. Going into workflow. Now, workflow is the backbone for automation in the entire Laserfiche suite. It basically enables organizations to monitor the repository, interact with the repository in forms, and create some automation that can't be done in forms in the repository by itself. But workflow is kind of you can say like a low code, no code kind of application where it uses a drag and drop interface to use specific activities to interact with files in the repository, with forms. If you guys are not familiar with any of our packages, this is what we use in the backbone for any of our filing processes. So, if you guys put a document into the ZZ Work queue, we have a Laserfiche subscriber that monitors that ZZ Work queue and takes that document, files it, does all the magic behind the scenes on that end. But It basically allows you to automate processes without any manual intervention. Alrighty, so kind of getting to the excuse me, the meat and potatoes of what this presentation is. Configuring forms to work with workflow. So this is going to be you guys are going to have admin access to be able to do this. And a lot of the time we at DocuNav do this and set this up, whether it's y'all's environment or host environment, but just kind of give you guys a, excuse me, an overview of the configuration, what it looks like. So as you can see right here on the screenshots on the right, this is the forms configuration. So on the actual machine or the server that forms is installed on, you go ahead and open up a web browser, and you would type into your search bar the server name / forms config, and that's how you get to your excuse me, the forms config. So most of the time that's going to be your form server, your app server, your web server, depending on the kind of configuration that you guys have. In this case, this is one of our demo boxes right here, so it would just be localhost, and most of the time if forms is installed on the machine, it would be localhost itself. So once you get into the actual forms config, you can kind of see on the left side there is this panel of a bunch of tabs you can kind of go through. And the most important ones for us are going to be that Laserfiche tab that I have highlighted in the screenshot to the right, on the right side of the screen, and the forms server, which I'll get into shortly. So if you actually navigate down to that Laserfiche tab, this will open up the actual workflow connection area, where you can see in the screenshot right here, this is where you go ahead and actually add your workflow server. And most of the time for our customers, I believe that you just have one processing server. I know that there's a bunch of customers that we also have to have multiple processing servers. You know, if you have a student record specific one, an employee records, and then a miscellaneous, I've seen those setups before as well. This is where you actually go ahead and add all the workflow servers that forms recognizes the different servers that can send stuff to. So as you can see right here, we have our server setup as localhost just because it's our sandbox and everything is contained in one environment. But you can actually go ahead and enter your server name as well as test the connection to make sure that everything is good. Now, the only other thing that we kind of need from this actual forms config to actually hook it up to workflow is if we were to navigate up to the forms server tab. As you can see, it's about 4 up from the Laserfiche tab that's highlighted on the screenshot above. You will go ahead and open that, and there will be a primary forms server URL that will basically show you the URL that your organization is set up to be the actual forms URL that people use to access forms, Laserfiche forms itself. So you're going to want to have that to actually connect to the workflow web services on the workflow side. I'll get into that in a little bit, but basically, once you've connected your workflow server to forms through the config and then got that URL, you are good to go on the form side. Moving on to the configuration from workflow to forms. This is kind of where it gets a little bit more complicated, and you definitely need to be on the server with admin access to be able to do this. I know that many of you guys are familiar with the Laserfiche, the actual repository, the desktop client, and it comes with the admin console. So workflow itself comes with its own admin console. As you can see right here, there is the workflow administration console. And once you've actually opened up this application on the workflow server, you can go ahead and look at the tabs on the left right here. If you can see my cursor, it'll be right here. Navigate to the external objects tab right here and expand it. And under the external objects tab will be the web services tab. Once you've opened up this tab, it'll look like this. And this is where you're actually going to add the forms connection to your forms server. I know on this screenshot right here, this is one of our dev boxes we use to test everything or a bunch of stuff. So there's going to be multiple, but most of the time you're only going to have one for your one singular form server. So to actually go ahead and add your form server, if it hasn't already been set up, you can either right click in the white space or go ahead and click this add web services button right here. And that will open up this GUI right here where you have access to edit your web services. Now this is where you can go ahead and name it, choose the type, which is going to be Laserfiche forms, and then you take that URL from the forms config that I had just shown or that we've just talked about earlier, and you can actually go ahead and paste that right here. From here, you can actually go ahead and test the URL to make sure that the connection is stable and it's all good. And it will actually show this connection tested successfully button or a GUI right here, a little tab, to know that everything is working good. So once you have completed both the forms config and the workflow config, you'll know that the applications are talking to each other and you can send forms or workflows between the two of them. Moving on. So going over some common use cases and some examples that we use for this kind of thing. So on the workflow to form side, most of the time, in my experience and what we've used here internally at DocuNav, workflows that call forms would be for anything that's scheduled. So, for instance, if you have a daily scheduled form for time tracking, for instance, so for us, when we do all of our billing stuff, or how we used to do it, we would have a workflow that is scheduled to run every morning at 7 a.m. that would basically loop through our list of engineers, and it would basically say, hey, you got to do your daily billing sheet, and they would basically send out a form every single morning that would go to my personal inbox, and then I would go ahead and fill that form out for the day, submit it, and then the next day that form would come back again. So workflow or running scheduled workflows is great for those kind of forms, and there's a bunch of other use cases, such as like any kind of checklist forms, or another example I've seen is time of year forms. So that's anything from, you know, enrollment forms come around and employees need to go and submit certain employment forms that they need to do. And if, for instance, I've seen it where we have built workflows for customers where the workflow would monitor the repository, and if a document is expired, it would go ahead and automatically see that, or workflow would see that, and then automatically email the user with the form that they need to fill out with updated documentation to get that taken care of. So any kind of scheduled workflow to call forms is one of the most common ways that we use this actual forms to workflow connection. Going from the forms to workflow, where forms is actually calling workflow, a lot of the times what I use this for is anything to do with SQL. So that's anything that you need to do for a specific lookup, if you need to do a update a table, anything like that, or just run a data dump. So personally, I have worked on a couple forms for a couple customers where, it goes through the entire process. All the fields get filled out by different approvers and whatnot, and the initiator, different approvers input all this data, and then they want this all in a SQL table that they want to use for dashboarding and something like that. So basically, at the end of the process, right before it saves to Laserfiche, what I would do is I'd create a table, and I would use the workflow to actually write every single field, or all the necessary fields in this case, to a SQL table that can be used for reporting, for dashboards, anything that you guys need on y'all's end. Another common thing we use for when going from forms to workflow is any kind of initiation form. So if any of you guys are familiar with our onboarding process or our SPED referral packet process, how we do those is we usually have a initiation form and then the actual main form. The initiation form is pretty much fill out the basic information for the larger process, in this case onboarding. So that'd be anything from like the employee information for the actual person trying to be onboarded, their information, that kind of thing. And then what that would do is the workflow would be called by the form, collect that data, and then use that data for the rest of the process. I'm kind of glossing over the whole onboarding process, but that's one of the main use cases that we use for it. All right, kind of going for some helpful resources that we use when configuring or troubleshooting any of these issues between forms and workflow. Laserfiche does offer configuration documentation, so they offer step-by-step help to kind of do what I kind of showed earlier in the slides work with configuring workflow, configuring forms, and whatnot. And if you guys need any of that information, just reach out to us and we'll be more than happy to provide it. Another resource which is super, super, super awesome that I use daily is Laserfiche Answers. And Laserfiche Answers is a collaborative forum for issues that anything comes up. And it's kind of like a forum where you can pose a question, and then Laserfiche support or other users who have run into the same issue can actually go ahead and answer questions on that forum or assist each other. And I found it to be a really grateful resource because a lot of the times with these configuration problems, the problem's already happened and it's been solved by someone else. You just kind of got to go find the answer, and usually that leads me to Laserfiche Answers. And then, of course, our support team. We have a great support team that is ready to help you guys with you guys' every need. The email is listed right here, and they're more than happy to help with any issues that you guys find or come across. All right, so now actually getting into the calling of the workflow from forms. So if any of you guys are familiar with forms actually building forms, the process diagram has a bunch of widgets. So that can be anything from email tasks to approval tasks to the service task. And this service task is what we actually use to call workflow from forms. So once you actually have the service task in your business process diagram, you can see here on the right side of the screen, this is what the actual details tab for the actual service task widget is going to look like. So you can actually rename the widget. Usually, you say the name of the workflow, that kind of thing, what it does, anything you guys need it to be, as well as the description. That can be anything you want. And then for the actual important stuff in there, you have the workflow server, which is going to be which server is the workflow is on that you're trying to call. In this case, it's localhost. In other cases, it can be, if this is a student records workflow and you're going to the student records workflow server, it's going to be that student records workflow server. So you can choose the server that it's actually going to go to. And then as well as once that is populated, you can have the specific workflow that you're going to be calling. So as you can see right here, we have the workflow server as localhost and the workflow name as webinar forms to workflow. And that's the workflow that's going to be called. Now, below that is a important question, and that is going to be the wait for workflow to finish before proceeding. And that is yes or no. And basically, it's pretty self-explanatory with what it does is it will wait for the workflow to complete before it will actually go to that next step in the actual forms business process. Most of the time, excuse me, I always click yes on this, just because there's a lot of dependencies in the processes that we build where the workflow needs to be finished and it needs to do what it needs to do before it can actually move on to the next step of the process. I can see that there can be different ways where it doesn't have to necessarily, but most of the time in stuff that we build, this is always a yes. All right, now for the other side of the equation, this is calling forms from workflow itself. So on the actual workflow side, there are three, sorry about that. There are three workflow activities that are used to specifically reference forms in Laserfiche workflow itself. And that is going to be the invoke business process, the retrieve business process variables, and the set business process variables. Now, kind of going through those, pretty self-explanatory. Invoke business process is what you would use in the workflow to actually start a form. So that is, as soon as this activity runs, that form is going to be ran, and we'll kind of get into it a little bit more in the demo, but you can choose to run it as the workflow systems account or a specific account that you can use inside of Laserfiche. Next is the retrieve business process variables, and this is what it sounds like. You basically retrieve the field variables from the actual Laserfiche form. And you have to note as well that this is for in-process forms as well. So once the form has actually been started on the Laserfiche form side, you can actually, if a workflow is called, you can use this activity to actually retrieve specific or all of the field variables that are in that Laserfiche form itself. And then you have the set business process variables, which is similar to the retrieve, and that is basically where you can actually change the actual forms variable in the forms process. So similar to the retrieve business process variables, this is only for in-flight instances. All right, let me go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and I will pull up the demo environment real quick where I can show you guys what we are working with. Alrighty. Okay, so you guys should now be able to see my screen. All right, kind of going back into the actual, kind of backtracking a little bit to the actual forms config. This is the actual form config for the actual sandbox environment that we're using right here. But just to kind of go reiterate, when you actually put into the search bar for, in this instance, Chrome, you would do the server name /forms config, and that would open up what you see here. Once you move down to the Laserfiche tab, once this loads, there you go. You can see this is where you add your Laserfiche workflow. Now, in this case, localhost right here, you can see that this is the name of the workflow server. You can go ahead and hit test connection. And this will actually test connection to forms, make sure it's able to reach itself. And if you want to go ahead and add another workflow server, all you got to do is just click the add button, put the new workflow server name in there, and that can either be the DNS value or the IP. You can go ahead and add that and test connection, and then there you go. Your workflow server is added. Now, kind of going back to the forms URL that you would need to actually set it up in workflow. If you go ahead and go to the form server, this is where you would see the primary form server URL. So once you have noted this, you are basically good to go on the forms config side of connecting forms and workflow to each other. Once you have this value, we can go ahead and actually open up the workflow administration console. And then like I was talking about earlier, you go to the external objects tab right here, expand it, and you get to the web services tab right here, where you can see the add web services button, or in this case, you can go ahead and right click and add web service. This is where you can actually name the actual web service, put that URL that I was just talking about, and then test. I'll go show you guys the current connection we have right now. So I have this named Forms Webinar, and it's a Laserfiche form. It's connected to Laserfiche Forms, and then we actually have that URL. If I go ahead and hit test URL, it will try to connect to Forms itself. This usually takes a second. And there you go, connection tested successfully. So once we get that confirmation, we know that we are good to go with the connection between workflow and forms. All right, so moving into the actual kind of demo. Really quickly, I'm going to show you guys a little form that I've created. I'll show you guys what the form looks like. Basically, this is a two-part form where I have two variables right here that I'm going to input on the form and then submit it. And then I have these three fields down here, which are not set currently. These two are read-only, and they will be updated by the workflow, and then they will be sent to an approval test to basically where we can see that the actual field value or the variable was updated itself. So moving to, or kind of backtracking a little bit, going to the actual service task that I was shown earlier. So you can see once the form is submitted, it will go to the workflow service task, where it will connect to the workflow server, which is localhost, and then connect to the workflow right here. And the current workflow it's connecting to is the webinar forms to workflow, which I'll show you guys in a second. But on the form side, if we were to go ahead and submit this, we'll go test one, and then select from the drop down right here. And then we'll go ahead and submit this form. Once this form has been submitted, one second, my connection might have actually just timed out. There we go. Apologies, y'all. I need to change these timeouts, which is fun. All right, we'll just go ahead and redo this real quick. Test one, and then example one. Submit this form. There we go. Now, once the form has actually been submitted, the workflow will run. And then if you guys remember from this, it will actually assign back to myself, where we can see in this right here that the form is going to come back with the single line being updated. It just took this drop-down variable and assigned it to the single line field, as well as the current date field was also assigned by workflow as well. So kind of going on the workflow side, this is a pretty simple workflow just to kind of show you guys what the retrieve business process variables does, as well as the set business process variables does. So kind of going top to bottom, I just have the variables created, or the tokens created, just to kind of assign the business process variables to the actual token, just so I can modify it. Usually this is best practice. I don't usually like to assign the actual business process variable pulling from this activity to anything. Our best practice here has just been setting it to tokens. That way we can manipulate them in any way that we want to. For instance, if you guys remember, the test one is showing the date added to it. So that I was able to do through the tokens. But kind of going into a little bit more detail of the retrieve business process variables, if I go ahead and click on that, on the properties on the right side, kind of going top to bottom, you have the activity name, the description, the server, which is the actual web service that we connected to. So you can see here it's Forms Webinar. If we have multiple, you can go ahead and connect it to anything else you guys need it to, as well as the fields. So these are the actual fields that we are going to be retrieving from the business process. So if I were to actually go ahead and click on this, you can see here that every single field that we have on that form is shown here. But I only want to retrieve the ones that I inputted, so not the ones that the workflow is filling later. So that would be that dropdown and then that single line field. I'm only retrieving those. From there, I am using this assigned token value to update the retrieve business process variables, the single line field, to tack on the date to the end of that, basically, as well as set the dropdown value to this TK dropdown right here. Now moving farther down to the set business process variables, similar on the right side to the retrieve, it is pretty similar. Server, forms webinar, pretty much stays the same. Most of the time, if you just have a form server, this is what it's going to be set to, as well as the fields. So now these fields are actually going to be not the ones retrieved, but the ones that I want to set. So as you can see right here, these are the ones in that secondary section I was showing a little bit earlier in that form, which would be that date field, that drop-down result field, and then that single line result field. Once you have had these, or once you have selected these fields up here, you can actually go down to the starting variable values. And this is where you actually set the variables in the form to be what you want them to be in the workflow, or what they're being updated by in the workflow, excuse me. So if I actually delete the date right here just to show you guys. So as you can see, I have the single line result, which was right here, and I'm setting that to TK single line updated. And if you guys remember in the assigned token values, I have set the TK single line updated to be retrieve business process variables, that single line field dash date. And then same thing with the dropdown, I'm setting it to TK dropdown, which is the same as the retrieve field values of the dropdown value. So to actually set the value, you go ahead and click this orange box right here. From here, you will choose the variables, and all these variables are going to be the same fields that you select in this fields box right here. So if we were to actually put the date, that'll be the date field in the form. And then to actually assign it a value, you go ahead and click this caret right here, and I'm just going to choose global and choose date just because I'm setting it to the current date. But you can set it to whatever variable in the workflow you have. So I'm going to go ahead and republish that, and that is essentially how it works from the form side. So yeah, just kind of going over it. I inputted these two values, and then I used the workflow to update and assign these values right here. All right, so that is going from forms to workflow. Now, vice versa, if we want to go from workflow to forms. So if you guys remember what I was saying earlier, kind of backtracking to that daily timesheet, this is a little workflow. We're kind of a little demo that I have built to show an example of basically that timesheet. So here, just to kind of give you guys some context, let's do this right here. So this would be the example of a timesheet. So as you can see, we have the title, the default form date, and then the account. So these 4 fields are actually what I'm going to be setting in the workflow. This kind of work done section is just for visuals. It doesn't really, it's not being touched by the workflow, but just to kind of give you guys an example. So in this example, this is going to be a workflow that essentially would run in the morning, kind of what I was talking about, at like 7 a.m. I would get it assigned to my own personal inbox. And from there, I can do what I need to do with it. And then I'll just get another one tomorrow for the daily timesheets that I would have to fill out. So, excuse me. Going top to bottom, same kind of thing, best practices, create workflow tokens. I'm just updating some stuff in here, but basically, as you can see, there was in the actual form, there was the form date, the form title, and then the day of the week. This is going into a little bit of how we build workflows, but I am setting the workflow to TK date to send, and that was set up here to just be, should have been one of the dates. There we go. And then the title, which I'm basically setting to be the date dash project billing. And then the day of the week is I'm taking that date to send, and then I'm only extracting the day of the week. Moving down, I'm using this find user activity right here, and I'm basically assigning it to my user in LFTS. So this can be anything. This can be a Windows account, a SAML account, an LFTS account. I'm just using it to set, I'm using this account to basically start that forms process from workflow. So going down to the invoke business process, similar to the other two, you choose the server. The difference being the process initiator section right here. So this is actually going to be the account that starts that form that is called by the workflow. So you can either choose it to be the workflow systems account, so it's whatever workflow is signed in as. Usually in any of our packages, in any of the environments that we usually set up, this is going to be the workflow account or our Laserfiche service account. In this case, I am choosing to start it with the result of the find user, which would be my account mdomisa. And basically, it's just saying that my forms user is starting this form. So it's basically it's the same thing as if I were to go ahead and start that form in forms itself. And then similar to the other two, you can actually go ahead and choose the fields that we are going to be updating when we actually invoke the business process. You can choose to just invoke the business process by itself with no variables. In this specific instance, I am going to be updating different things like the account, the default form date, the day, and then the title, as we saw in the variables up here. And then similar to the set business process variables that we looked at in the previous workflow, if you go ahead and click this orange button, you can see the different variables that we have selected in the fields section, and you can go ahead and select what you want these variables to be. If I go ahead and publish this, you can see that if we, in this specific instance, this would probably run on a schedule. I'm going to manually run it just to show you guys now. All right, so now that workflow is completed, I will go to my own personal inbox, which I'm just going to double check if this doesn't sign me out. There we go. Once I've signed in, I can see that I have this daily timesheet that was started by the workflow. This previously wasn't here. So if I were to go ahead and actually click on it, there we go. You can see that we took the variables from the form and then actually filled out the variables from the workflow that we're using to invoke the process. And we are actually going to see that title. So we're going to see that date dash project billing. We're going to see that default form date. We're going to see that day of the week that it started, and then the account that I used to assign it to me. From here, it's just like any other form. You can choose anything else, but it's just like starting a form yourself. It's just done automatically by workflow, and you can choose the the user that starts it, either being the service account or any account that you find in the workflow. So one thing that I do want to note, especially with invoking workflows and setting field values using the set business process values itself. So this is basically like a one-to-one. You're basically taking the variable and shoving it into the form. But when you invoke a business process from workflow, I just want to make sure to remind you guys that if you're just setting these variables, so say the form had a lookup rule. So if I was starting a business process and I'm inputting the employee ID that I'm using to run a lookup on location or department or anything like that, first name, last name, that lookup won't run if it's triggered by workflow. You would actually have to gather those variables in the actual workflow and then insert them into the form itself. You can't just, it doesn't act exactly the same as if you were to invoke it yourself through forms itself. You would have to actually set all those values yourself. All right, let me open back up the PowerPoint. Alrighty, so any questions? I know I kind of sped through this kind of stuff, but if you guys have any questions on the configuration, any questions on the actual invoking forms from workflow or workflow from forms, so I'd be happy to answer any.
Yep, and if anyone does have any questions, just put it in the chat. I'll go ahead and read them. But to get us started, just some frequently asked questions we run into quite a bit. Miles, do you need technical knowledge to build these workflows, to build these forms, or can just business users build them?
So most of the time we see us at DocuNav either build those forms in workflows or anyone on y'all side that has access, admin access to those. But it looks a little bit daunting. Workflow can look a little bit daunting, but it being low code, no code, and just drag and drop, once you kind of understand the configuration, and this is both in forms and in workflow, it's in my opinion pretty easy to understand, but I can see how it can be a little bit daunting.
Yeah, and with a shameless plug, we do offer training. We can build things together, right? But I've seen just standard end users with enough experience and enough practice are able to build pretty complex forms, and so it's cool that Laserfiche has that offering. When it comes to like systems like SQL, Skyward, any other database, can workflow actually update data in those other systems?
Absolutely. So I'm going to kind of answer that in two parts. So SQL itself, yes, we can 100% update tables. We can basically run anything. There's multiple activities in workflow itself that you can use to insert data, update data, or even just run custom queries itself. So that's a super big proponent of workflow being able to connect to SQL itself. And kind of going back to one of the use cases, I've built a lot of workflows personally where I've taken forms data, retrieved those business process variables, and then inserted them into SQL tables themselves. So that's a big proponent of workflow being able to combine those two worlds and be able to edit whatever you guys need to. As for Skyward, that's a little bit more of a complicated question. If it is anything that we're writing to our own custom tables, then 100% that's something we can update. Usually we try not to update that kind of stuff, just kind of retrieve the values that are in the tables. Just because when we're working with Skyward, we're reading right from you guys' databases. However, we're doing that if we're doing a CSV drop, if we're doing a linked server, that kind of thing. It's getting a little bit technical, but workflow can read data from Skyward if it's in our custom tables, or if we have a linked server to y'all's Skyward database.
Mm-hmm. And then if I'm a Laserfiche admin, or I kind of own the IT side of things, who should have access to be able to build or modify forms and workflows?
So forms, you 100% need a full license, as well as you would need access to build certain kinds of forms. So to actually build the forms, you do need admin access. And then once a form is actually created and published, you would need, oh my goodness, I'm blanking. It would be process administrator rights to the form to actually edit the form itself. There's 3 tiers of access in Laserfiche forms. It is process admin, I think it's business administrator, and then submitter. Process admin basically means you can go ahead and edit the form, do whatever you need to do from an admin level. Business administrator is you have access to start the form, same as anyone else, and then also you would have access to that monitor tab, so you'd be able to monitor different forms instances in different kind of where they are at in their approval process or their business process. And then submitter is self-explanatory. They have access to submit the form.
All right. It looks like we've got someone actually raising their hand. You can actually come off mute, I believe.
Can you hear me? This is Rosalind Rosenthal.
Yep, we've got you.
Now, I don't know if this is the forum to ask this question, but I'm currently building a form where our submitter can upload photos or videos. And is there any kind of help that I can look at? Because I looked through your help online, and I sort of kind of I'm sort of kind of stuck. So can you lend any help as to, and I write the form to a database, a SQL, using SQL, I do write it to a database. Is there any kind of shortcut or any kind of hints you can give me in order to write in order writing photos and videos to the database from the form?
Okay, that's definitely something I would want to take back and look into, because I am not sure on writing photos and videos to a SQL database. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. I'm not
I'm
sure off the top
using,
of my head,
oh, I'm sorry.
but no, you're all good. You're good. Go ahead.
I'm using the new form. And I think
Mhm.
we're on 11, and it does nice. It it has the task where I can upload and the photos and the videos. It's just when I go through the workflow to write it to my database, it only writes the URL for the video or the URL for the photo, and I was just wondering, do I have to set up something besides, in the workflow to actually write this data to maybe another table versus
Mhm.
just my regular table? That's where I'm
Okay.
at.
Okay. I think easiest next steps would be, have you reached out to our support team at all?
No, I have not.
Okay. So if you go ahead and do that, they will 100% get back to you and look into this one. I've never actually heard of this one before. This would actually be kind of fun to tinker around with. But if you reach out to our support team, support@DocuNav.com, they'd be more than happy to look into it. And I'd actually be very intrigued to see what they find. But that's definitely something that they can help with.
Great. Thank you so much.
And
course.
what organization are you with?
I'm with the Louisville Independent School District.
Okay, great.
Okay.
I'll also reach out to your CSM to make sure that we get that handled.
Great. Thank you.
All right.
I was thinking that too. I just saw that chat. You might have to convert into base 64 to sort in the database. I'm not sure on the videos, but I know for photos you probably have to go base 64. That was my thinking too.
Any other questions from the chat? Miles, I did have a couple other ones.
Okay.
Would you be able to, so say you have multiple forms that go through the same approval process, would you be able to reuse different workflows across those multiple forms, or would you have to go back and actually create one specifically for each form?
You can do both. I mean, you can have a workflow that services many forms, or you could have a form and like a one-to-one forms to workflow relationship. I've seen both done, but yeah, you can. I mean, as long as you just assign in that service task which workflow you want it to point to, you can have multiple forms go into one workflow.
All right. That's all kind of the FAQs I had on my end. Any of the participants, I'm gonna go ahead and wait on the line for another 30 seconds or so before we close things out today. But if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out, whether it be in the chat, directly to my email or a support team, and we'd be happy to help you out. But I do really appreciate taking the time today to join us for the session. I also want to thank Miles for doing a great job at his presentation. And like I said, if there's anything you need, please don't hesitate to reach out. But I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, rest of your week, and I hope to see you around.